And as mentioned earlier, I am joined by the ever so great, I mean that in a real sense, great Chuck Dixon. Mr. Dixon, I appreciate you joining us on For Canon's Sake, man. How you doing?
Oh, very good. Very good, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Of course, this is something that is a kind of a long time coming. Not in just me being as huge of a fan as I am of you, but the audience. I told you this off air. I want to make sure I told it to you on air, how much obviously I appreciate the work that you've been able to do and been a big part of like my upbringing in terms of some of these comic book characters. So it's an honor certainly to have you on. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day.
Not a problem at all. Glad to be here.
Well, let's dive right into it. I mean, let the audience and myself know of like what is Chuck Dixon's story getting into this sphere of comic books or the American comic books. Like what got you to that point? Just how did it all start? Lay it all on us.
Well, like a lot of comic book creators, I was sick a lot as a kid. And, like long hospital stays, things like that.
Yeah.
And comic books were my main diversion. And people knew to bring me comic books. And I had difficulty with school because of illness. And my mom took me to the doctors and she said, he's going to fail first grade unless he can read at a certain level. The doctor said, well, what does he like to read? She said, well, he loves reading comic books. He says, well, buy him all the comic books he wants. So here I am.
There you go. Easy enough. It's funny how like that kind of works out with not just yourself, but with myself as well. And just kind of that introduction being parental, you know what I mean? Like a lot of, I don't think people understand how huge that is. Cause it was like that for me with my mother being, even though she wasn't the biggest comic book person, that was my introduction, you know what I mean, to all of this was simply her. More so, I think with me, it's just being an antsy little kid and just like, hey, give them something that'll make them sit down and concentrate on some things. And I just thought that it was a bunch of these cool concepts of comic book creation. So it's cool to kind of hear that, obviously, you being a writer in your own respects, how that's happened even with yourself. So what was, before you started entering in what people deem as like now what is mainstream comics, which is DC and the Marvels of the world, like where did you kind of start in that and like where did you start at there before you got kind of into more of the I guess big two?
Well, I did some, I did fanzine work. I wrote children's books for a while, even did some illustrations for children's books.
Nice.
I didn't like doing that. Comics were my thing. Comics was what I wanted to do. So I kept taking a run at the companies. And eventually I got two breaks almost simultaneously. Eclipse Comics put me on a comic called Airboy. And Larry Hama hired me to work with him eventually on Savage Sword of Conan.
Yep.
So, I was working for Eclipse and Marvel simultaneously.
That makes sense. So with that being said, so, you get into like I was sort of coding. That was actually exactly where I was going to go with that. And, we know we'll talk about it in a little later in the show with the stuff that you've been able to do with like the Bat Family and everything there. But for our audience, I love to ask people that have been able to work with, let's say, both of those companies and the Marvel and DC, and you doing, I know, obviously Punisher stuff as well as that. Were there any just from even just a professional level differences, like notable differences between doing work definitely during that period of time for both of those different companies?
I mean, the difference between the companies?
Yeah.
Not really, because, they would, switch editors all the time.
Right.
I mean, I worked for Archie Goodwin when he was at Marvel. I worked for Archie Goodwin when he was at DC. He was the same guy. Yeah. So it all depended on who you were working for directly. You usually didn't get involved with the editor-in-chief or publisher or anything like that. So it was pretty much, the crowd you ran with at that company.
Right. So, you get put on, obviously, Sword of Conan. We know Punisher going a little after that. Like, where did the first kind of Bat Family or DC, because what was actually the first DC work that you did?
It was that first Robin miniseries,
right?
With Tom Lyle, yeah,
right. So that's what I figured. So with that being said, so that obviously expands into, I mean, so many other different. When I think like stuff Bat Family, I think Chuck Dixon, because you did a lot of stuff with the Bat Family.
Did a lot.
Yeah, you did pretty much everybody and everything. So was it with Robin? Is it something like they saw that you kind of understood the characters or something like that when you first got on that Robin gig, which had them putting you up on so much different like work related to the Bat Family?
Well, Denny O'Neil had seen my work on Airboy. Mm-hmm. And he liked how I wrote a young character. So he just sort of approached me cold and said, would you be interested in talking about writing, Tim Drake Robin? And I had been reading the books. I knew the character. But I went up and we talked a bit, and he convinced me to write it. I wasn't sure at first that I was right for it.
Okay.
But he talked me into it.
That's interesting. And obviously understanding that you had done someone that was younger, I can certainly understand that kind of connection there. And that's Tim Drake. Robin, who a lot of people, they really love their Tim Drake. I certainly love them, Red Robin and all of that sort of stuff. I want to get into that here in the future about some changes that happened there. But certainly with the Bat Family and then actually doing the big guy, Batman, pressure, is that something that is felt when you are doing what people deem as one of the most prominent characters, if not the most prominent, most popular character of all time when you think mainstream comic books, when you're writing that character, how does that feel? Is there some sort of sense of pressure that you have to get it right?
Well, you don't want to mess it up. That's for sure. You don't want to be known as the guy who wrote a really lousy Batman story. So, but on the other side, it's Batman.
Right.
If you have some sort of understanding and you're conversant with the character, and you have some imagination, you've got some Batman stories in you, and you've got that to fall back on. It's not as much pressure as creating a new character,
right? Because
the audience is pretty much on your side. The readers want you to do good because they want a good comic,
right? So
they're behind you. The other important element here is I had Denny O'Neil and a small army of assistant editors who were all top flight professionals, all interested in quality work, who made it plain that they had faith in me. And that makes a huge difference, because if you don't think your editor has faith in you, you're second guessing yourself all day long as you're writing. But if you know that they trust you, that you can do anything, and then you're free, to create within the framework of the character.
Right. That makes sense. That makes all the sense in the world. I mean, that's actually a lot of perspective. We see that definitely in a lot of other. I come from the sports world. It's the same kind of thing with like a coach. You know what I mean? And believing in those players, and you see that kind of elevates them as well. So that's certainly interesting. So with that being said, like your prominence was, I would argue, like, again, 90s. When I think 90s, I think Bat Family and I think Chuck Dixon. That was a competitive decade, though. From even, I can imagine from a professional standpoint, but that was when I grew up. And I had a lot of material to choose from, really, from both companies. Is that something that a writer is conscious of when you have a lot of talent that is coming up in this day and age? Is it one of those things where it's like you only worry about your bacon, you only worry about doing the best story that you can? Or is that something else that you're conscious of the fact that there are other people that are my peers that are doing killer work as well? I have to kind of outdo them if I want to stay on the, is it a friendly competition? Like how is that dynamic?
Well, I realized going into the comic business that you have a window. And I thought if I can get 5 years where I'm in demand, where they're calling me, I'm not calling them, I'll be good. And I was lucky. I got about 15 years. Yeah. So, I was very lucky. And I continue to work today. The phone still rings. But I didn't worry about what other people were doing. I was looking at what other people were doing. And there were a few guys, it's like, wow, I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it was a friendly competition. It got meaner later, but you know, even amongst writers you necessarily didn't click with personally, everybody was still professional.
Good. And that is, I could kind of tell, I guess, that just from the outside looking in, and definitely, I mean, comparing this to the recent decade of what we've been dealing with both of really the main the big two. And it seems like a free-for-all sometimes where canon doesn't matter. Continuity doesn't really matter to any of these guys, and maybe are people that probably shouldn't be on some of these projects that are unfortunately on these projects. Was there any part of, like, maybe even from a leadership standpoint, when you were coming up in the game, that you could identify? For example, I had like Shane Davis, who was more of a recent kind of guy that was more so doing stuff with DC, and he could kind of see the writing on the wall when there was changes, like, all right, with them becoming more mega corporate entities and them being tied to like Warner, and seeing that instead of caring about his story, they were caring more about well, that looks like it's going to be a good toy, or that character looks like something that maybe is going to be adopted in a movie or something. Was that something that you ever could see? And what was that change like, just being in the game? And again, contrasting it to how you came up and the differences in the leadership.
Well, I mean, when I was at DC, particularly, they let us know about participation agreements. In other words, when you created a new character or device, you know, you got paperwork on it that you owned a piece of it, and you would get a small piece of whatever DC made off of it. And they really didn't encourage you to create more stuff for the toy lines and stuff, but I leapt on it. I was creating new characters and stuff left and right. You know, number one, to keep the stuff fresh, because you don't want to just keep revisiting the same characters and situations. And I was building the Batman universe. I was adding gadgets and devices and things that he could use, because you know, he would always be upgrading. And you know, so part of it was, yeah, these might turn into toys, or these might be used in a movie or TV show. And then part of it was just keeping it fresh. But there was no pressure at that point.
Okay.
You know, we were sort of separate. You know, I mean, the guys in licensing liked me because I created a lot of stuff they could sell.
Right. That's interesting. So yeah, like, and to kind of piggyback off of that point, like, you know, with coming up with the characters that now are more mainstay, the Bane, you know, and all of that, like, how on earth, I can only imagine, but how does that feel? Because definitely when you see what happened with you know, Dark Knight and that trilogy and everything, and people look at Tom Hardy and look at Bane, how does that actually feel, where you can say, no, that's not what you necessarily wrote them to be? You could say, well, I created that, at least what they're attempting to do in terms of that adaptation. Like, is that something that is like, okay, you think, oh yeah, I made it, or is it like, yeah, well, that's kind of what I expected?
Oh, I didn't expect it. I mean,
okay.
We created the idea behind Bane, marketing wise, was that we would create a permanent member of the Batman villain, you know, rogues gallery. But we didn't know that he'd have legs like this. We didn't know that he would catch on like this. I mean, you know, Graham Nolan and I certainly put the sweat in to try to make him an indelible character. We had no idea he'd go on and on like this. And I mean, I'm glad he's a household name now. I don't have to explain who he is anymore.
Yeah.
Because people, I created Bane. Who's Bane? Nobody says who's Bane anymore.
Right, not anymore. Not even close, right? Are there any other characters that you kind of either created or like heavily developed upon, obviously beside, like, you know, Tim Drake, again, we'll get into that in a minute, that you think that maybe even they still haven't done a lot of expansion upon, or maybe even characters that you're just really proud of in terms of how that came out? Because I'm in that kind of process right now where I see my vision and I see the artists and the like the pencil and ink, and I see the actual artist or the colorist do the work, and I get it back like, man, that's even better than what I envisioned in terms of who this character is. And I think that's really going to be a mainstay. Is there any other characters that you either, again, uber proud of, or maybe even those that you wish that DC kind of expanded upon because they haven't lived up to their potential?
Well, I created a spoiler, Stephanie
I
Brown,
love it.
and kind of wish they'd push her a little bit more in the toy area. I mean, Lego likes her. Lego uses her all the time, but she really hasn't. They really haven't pushed her as a character. And that's what happens. The licensors come around, they go, "What's popular?" and then they suggest things. The comic company suggests things. I mean, I did a Batman pirate story one time, and Kenner did a whole line off of that one annual. So you never know what they're going to pick out. But I wish they'd push spoiler a little harder.
And she's actually one of the characters that I've said that I thought added an awesome dynamic to the Bat family again, along with Cassandra Cain and her being orphan. I thought both of those characters were great additions, and it seemed like about 2016 when they did Rebirth stuff with that Detective Comics, and I really loved definitely the dynamic between her and Tim Drake. I just thought it was one of the better things that had happened. But yeah, just like they just threw that away, it seems, and they didn't want to really expand certainly upon that. So that leads me, of course, into Birds of Prey. When I know. Look, I got my gripes with that movie big time. And I do. I think a lot of us certainly do. But a lot of people don't understand that was something that you were, because didn't you do the first Oracle or the first what was it, Black Canary Oracle Birds of Prey? What was that annual or whatever that it was? Didn't you do the first one?
Yeah, we did a one shot, then a mini series, then a few more one shots, and then a monthly.
Right.
And that was Jordan Gorfinkel. He was my editor.
Right.
And it was his idea to do Birds of Prey.
Right. And I thought that was obviously a cool concept. I mean, when I think, of course, Birds of Prey, I do think Oracle. I think, of course, Black Canary, and that expanded to, Huntress and all of those other additions, which I thought was very, very cool. But we get this movie. And you see these characters like Cassandra Cain, which aren't even anything like what Cassandra Cain is supposed to be. I don't know if you actually saw Birds of Prey.
No.
And I certainly can't blame you for doing that. But on a serious note, knowing that you had pretty much the hand being the writer for this work and growing this brand of what people associate with the Birds of Prey takes a little while. Finally, it gets adapted, and it's something that is not even anything near what you were attempting to, I guess, make it in terms of who these characters were. I know we talked about the good that can maybe come out of it, but is that a frustration that you maybe get from you might not be able to do much with that. It's not necessarily in your power, but look, when I think Birds of Prey, I think Chuck Dixon. So how does Chuck Dixon feel about that when it seems like maybe there is some sort of bastardization of a character, maybe in live action?
Well, when it comes to movies and TV and adapting comics, you have to very early on turn your heart to stone. And you just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We once had a conversation, and it was a bunch of editors, and somebody said that the Batman movies, they were so happy for the Batman movies because they validated the character. And I said, I don't need movies to validate Batman.
I love that.
The comics validate Batman.
I love that.
Comics are eternal. The movies, TV shows come and go, change and morph. Batman's always going to be there in the comics. And I thought if ever Denny O'Neil was going to adopt me as a son, he would have in that moment. It was just the look he gave me. Like, thank God someone's saying this.
Yeah.
But they're going to do what they want to do, and really all they used Birds of Prey is a blanket title.
Yeah,
they wanted to make an all-girl power superhero flick, and they didn't have any other blanket title to cover it.
Yep.
So.
Yep, and that's why it made no sense, with Harley Quinn and all that stuff. I'm like, what? No Oracle, it's like, how can we even have a Birds of Prey without having her present? And that was tough for me to watch. Like, just as a huge fan, it was tough for me to watch that. But I guess that makes sense that you kind of got to look at it from a different perspective. I've even made this comment from me being very knowledgeable on these books. It's like, I've got to the point to where I I have to, it's like the more you know about this stuff, the more frustrating it is.
Yeah.
It's
hard to be a fan sometimes.
Yeah, it really is, because you're like, wait a minute, that just isn't correct, and that doesn't even make any sense. And that's what I guess that's what I'm alluding to when I talk about like the sheer free for all. Sometimes it feels like, and I love what you mentioned about it's about the comics first, right? This is where all of these characters come from. This is what we know and love. There exists no movie without these characters first appearing here. This is where, at least at minimum, you may bastardize them, but at least at minimum, this is where the characters come from. Is that something that you think maybe current era of maybe a DC or a Marvel writer, that is it something that they now put on the back burner in terms of taking that into consideration? That, look, at first it's about this. I remember listening to Hickman, who was doing X-Men stuff currently, and he was saying like, yeah, if my stuff gets adapted in the movie, whatever, but that's not why I do this. I don't do this for that. I do it for the comic books. But that doesn't seem to be, at least from what I pick up as a customer, something that is prioritized. Now it seems like people are writing to maybe have their stuff appeal to that demographic, which is a different, Hollywood demographic, and the comic book is different. Those are two different kind of audiences right there. Is that something that you think that the current era of writers are taking maybe too much into consideration, and that's the other aspirations outside of the actual book and the actual characters?
Well, a lot of comic book writers now are what I call tourists. They're not comic book lifers. I really only want to write comic books. It's the medium I love. I'm not on my way to the great American novel or writing a screenplay. I just, not interested. And, but a lot of these guys, it's a resume enhancer to work at Marvel or DC, or, they're looking for that adaptation, and they're looking for that Hollywood money. I just don't think about that stuff, when I'm working. Sometimes if I'm doing a creator-owned thing, it's nice to dream. What if somebody picked this up and I made a build? They backed a truckload of money up to the house. That'd be great.
Of course.
But when I'm doing it, when I'm working on it, that's all I'm doing. I'm not thinking about anything else, and I'm not trying to. Especially today, with everything is so groomed and shaped, toward a certain political perspective. I mean, I can't write that way. Right. I can't think like that.
Right, and that's admirable, because it's the opposite with the current era of writers, like you were actually mentioning. It's like everything is done with some sort of agenda, certainly in mind, and everything is done with some sort of, be it political or social, and it's heavily slanted one way, which I would argue is the big frustration in it all. When there was a time where you could pick up, like, there are universal truths. It doesn't matter where you're at on the political aisle, but certain things made sense for certain characters. Like, I come from, if there's a guy that will represent my line of thinking, it would be someone like Anarchy, obviously, as a character, and the latter half, when he becomes more of an objective, not the communist one, but more of an objectivist. That would be more a line of me. But I've said my favorite character, of course, is Batman, for various reasons, despite him being very different from where I'm at. And I think that's where it's being lost, certainly here. So you see that, like myself, and I've heard you talk about it certainly on your channel, about everything being done with an actual agenda. And you mentioned that that's not what you think about when you write. Like, that's not what it's about. You're not even taking that into consideration. But the entire game is that now, and we've seen a shift with even people going out of their way to maybe go to something like manga to replace that. Do you think that heavy political slant, or the social slant, or rather beating the audience over the head with that, is part of that?
It's all part of it, because when you emphasize the political, or you're trying to change the culture in some way, as if you could do that, you're turning off a lot of people. And you're also, generally, these stories that are very woke are not particularly well crafted. They're not well written. They're generally not well drawn. They're just bad comics. So they're not going to convince. If you're trying to convince people through the comics medium, you're going about it all wrong, because your comics suck. They're not going to convince anybody of anything. The other thing is comics they're escapist entertainment that should allow for a broad audience, as broad an audience as you can get.
Absolutely.
And you should allow the readers to project themselves on those characters. So when you take those characters and you give them a political agenda, you put them somewhere on the political spectrum. I mean, or if you made them a Mormon, or you made them a vegetarian or whatever, at that point you've lost readers because I can't relate to that guy.
Right.
I thought he was like me. I thought I was Peter Parker.
Right.
And now you've made Peter Parker into something I could never be. I mean, I could never be Spider-Man, but I can relate to Peter Parker.
Right.
And on the manga side, I mean, they're better crafted, they're better written. There's more variety. It's not all superheroes 24/7. And they understand and respond to their audience. American comics, they've literally rejected their audience.
Yeah.
If you don't like their comics, they say you're stupid. It's like, no, you're stupid because you've driven away 75% of your potential audience.
Amazing. And it seems like we've had some arrogance of like definitely current writers that don't even want to accept or embrace the writing that is on the wall, that people are going to other things. And maybe with the big two, you guys aren't doing, at least not nearly as well as what you had been doing in the past or what you should be doing. You think that in an era where they're making billion digits, pumping out $1 billion movies, that would at least transfer to something, but it doesn't, not in terms of comic books. And people are going elsewhere to things like manga, because it is, as you just mentioned, there's a lot more variety. The stories seem to matter, and it's not like just a heavy political slant one way or the other with these stories. So why is it, in your honest opinion, that you get these activists, is really what they are, that are doing this work, and despite we see the sales, we see a lot of bad, like you talk about this woke material, like it's just not even good material at all, just from a cohesive standpoint. It just doesn't even, it's convoluted, it doesn't usually even make sense because you're leading with, let's say, the social political views as opposed to who the character actually is supposed to be. So why is it that I would thought this would have ended a while back, but it seems like every day we get a new story where they double down. They say, okay, you are stupid, and it's not about the customer, or you're somewhat a racist, homophobe, or something like that because you dare to acknowledge it. Is it that they got too far in, and that they have to commit to that audience, or what is your take on that?
It just seems, I mean, people go, oh, it's a conspiracy. No, I think it's an understanding. These people came out at colleges and universities. They got jobs in publishing. They got jobs in HR departments, and they just sort of took over and made their own rules. I mean, I've got Coca-Cola calling me a racist. I've got, airline companies telling me I'm anti-science. And it's like, what the hell is this? What's with these straw man arguments? But, comics are, at the lower end of the life cycle of corporations. They're bottom feeders, but it's the same woke corporate culture where they've all bought into this. And I don't know why. I just remember, I think it was Lenin who said they'll sell us the rope that we'll hang them with. And it's because, they're just trying to be, seen as good and decent and moral people. And in doing that, they're just crushing everybody. And they're alienating readers, they're alienating creators, and they're not making any money. Let me tell you that.
Yeah, I mean that's obvious. I mean, the amount of posts that I see, I mean, it looks good. I mean, they think retweets on Twitter and Instagram or something like that translates to sales, and it doesn't. It never does that. A lot of the guys that they seem to be trying to appeal to on those social media websites are not comic book readers. They're not comic book lifers. So they're just really appealing to some people that may agree with them, but they're not going to go down to the comic book shop on a Wednesday in order to pick up that book that you're specifically using to sell. So that leads me into the elephant of the room. I mean, you had, though not necessarily creating him, when it came to growing the story of the great Tim Drake, Chuck Dixon obviously is responsible for that. So you see what they did in terms of this random out of nowhere. Like, it made no sense. One of the last characters that they should have been doing this with, Tim Drake, they changed his sexuality. Like, what is up with that? How did you feel about that when you first, obviously heard about that, considering that you had a lot to do with this character's growth?
Well, I mean, it's just lazy writing. I mean, in the 90s, when they wanted to gin up interest, they killed the character.
Yeah.
Now they turn them gay or, change their ethnicity or change their gender. And they think this is clever and creative. Obviously, everybody's tired of it. The sales reflect that everybody's tired of it. What's shocking about this? There's been gay characters in comics now for literally
it's not
4 decades. I mean, it's like Lisa Simpson said at the Gay Pride Parade,
Yeah.
It's like, we were here last year.
Exactly.
I mean, it's okay. You don't have to be in our face about it.
Yeah.
And it obviously violates the character. And people say, well, you have no say. You're not writing it anymore. No, I'm not writing anymore. But I wrote 150 issues, so I think I have an opinion.
If anybody has an opinion, it's Chuck Dixon, of course, on this. You have every right to it. And I remember hearing you talk about it. I really wanted your thoughts on that. And I heard you talk about it and like, look, these guys have all this opportunity. It's like it was like echoing the same sentiments that I do. They have this opportunity to create a new character. If that's something that they wanted so bad for some gay or bisexual character, despite it already being done, if they wanted that so bad, they have every opportunity to create a new one. They didn't have to use that. They went out of their way to use them. And yeah, it grabbed headlines. I remember you once saying like, these guys can't even separate the people that write these articles can't even separate the fact that there's different Robins. They don't know. They just think it's all the same to them.
Yeah.
So
Robin is gay now.
Yeah, so. Exactly. It doesn't matter which one it is. It could be Todd. It could be Drake. Grayson. Drake. It doesn't matter. All of them certainly are the same according to them. So why do you? I know the answer to this, but just for the sake of the audience, what's the point? Like you have a day and age where these people have all of this access to all of these resources because they're tied to these mega corporate entities. And instead of utilizing those resources, marketing, to get a new character to catch on, they instead go to Tim Drake and say, bam, they went to Iceman not too long ago, did the same thing. It's so off brand for that character that it doesn't make sense. So right. Considering that, what is your take on that? And just give it to us straight as to why they're specifically going after characters that not only have been around, but are like mainstays and have been around, prominent characters of prominent families.
Well, first of all, they're creatively bankrupt.
I love that.
They can't create new, interesting characters. And even when they turn characters gay or gender swap or change ethnicity, that's all they do. They don't do anything to make them more interesting, which I think in the end is highly insulting to the groups that they say they want to appeal to. Okay, Tim Drake's gay. Did you do anything else to make him more interesting? No, he's just gay now. I know a gay writer who was asked by one of the big companies to write a character. And they said, yeah, I'd love to write that. I love that character. And when they were brought in, they found out that they were only hired because they were gay, because they wanted to turn the character gay. And that writer, to their credit, said, I'm not doing that.
Right.
That's horrible. That's insulting. It's like that's the only, that's my gimmick. I'm gay, so I've got to apply that to this character, and that's all it is. It's a gimmick. And they say, well, we want to support a gay agenda. We want to support diversity. We want to support inclusion. And then they write gay characters that are either flat and totally uninteresting, or even more disturbing, they'll write gay characters who are predatory. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what is that about?
Yeah.
If you watch stuff on streaming, on Netflix, on Amazon, it's like half of the gay characters they bring out are predators.
Right.
They're sexual predators. I'm like, what is that about? Right. How is this helping anybody?
Yeah, they write
it's
him as
either
like
not
cliches.
Interesting or, I know how to make him interesting. He's evil.
Exactly. And that's so bizarre to see that because of that opportunity that's there. And I think you put it perfectly. It's the term that I've used to describe these guys, and that's creatively bankrupt. I think there's a reason why you see these guys try to do things that are not attached to the big two, those same writers that would do stuff like that. and they don't really ever get off the ground. And I think that's because of it. They have to use a character that everybody knows. Otherwise, who would ever listen to the story? But you mentioned it. It's like insulting. I talk about this and with the subject matter of race. You know what I mean? It's like you get what I call deemed tokenism, and you get like characters where they'll just race swap a character out of nowhere. It'll be the same version of the character, and they just swap them. And you get all of these like characters that may have not had the development that they could have, and they remain on the shelf, right? That character remains on the shelf. I saw Marvel doing all this goofy stuff, and North Star just sits there on the shelf like unattended. And I'm like, y'all have an original gay character that you're not even attempting to grow.
But was fully accepted by the readers.
Right, exactly. Fully embraced by the readers. Nobody cared. Straight people didn't care the fact that they didn't shun him because he was gay or anything, and say, I wouldn't buy that book because North Star in it. We didn't do that. It was like we were fine. And they never expanded upon that. Instead, they just went to these other characters like the Iceman, and now Iceman is wearing high heels and other weird stuff that, again, it just doesn't make sense. It's just off-brand for the character. So with that being said, you know, obviously it's funny you mentioned Graham Nolan and a lot of guys that have that you had worked with that have crossed over into more just doing straight independent work. I mean, seeing a lot of money, revenue being brought up into it. A lot of these guys that I've had on the show before. Do you think that in itself, and like the things that we have discussed and the bastardization that is happening of these characters, has created an opportunity for independent guys to give, let's say, that outlet to people who are still intrigued by the culture of American comic books and are just waiting for something else?
Well, I mean, you take you do the math. You've got a lot of underemployed comic book creators, and you've got a lot of unserved comic book readers who have nothing to read because they've rejected this crap. And, you know, that's where it is. I mean, you get guys, I mean, Graham's a lifer. You know, Brian Polito's a lifer. You know, I'm a lifer. We're in comics, till we draw our last breath. So what are we going to do? Are we going to go work at Home Depot? Or are we going to keep doing comics? And, you know, we've found a way. We've found a way, you know, doing digital, doing crowdfunding, doing whatever to, keep working. You know, because we want to do this. We love it. You know, it's a job, but we love it. But, at dinner time, you got to sit down and look your family into the eye. I'm actually earning a living doing this. You know? And then, you know, for the comic readers, they can continue to follow talent that they liked. They can, you know, it's all new characters and everything else. But, you know, if you love the medium, you're going to love what all these guys are doing. And I wish more guys would do it. There's a whole laundry list of guys I'd love to see more work from.
And I love that, you know, it's funny that the guy that you just mentioned, and if for the sake of the audience, you wanted to mention what happened with that, where these guys, you know, we know what cancel culture is. And it seems like definitely workers among the big two will, for just any reason, just because you didn't vote in a way that they didn't like or something like that, they out you and they want you gone. And it's awesome. We've seen this. You know, I obviously had Ethan Van Sciver on the show, of people that have done a lot of work for these guys, and then they got kicked to the curb, and the fans caught them. You know what I mean? And said, okay, you know, you're not working for the big two, but we will make you probably way more money than what you were making, being even paid by Marvel or DC for doing what you still love to certainly do. And I know we got there's a bunch of alternatives that are starting to pop up. You have like the Substack thing. You had major DC writers that have left from that. Do you think that we're going to see a exodus of sorts, where you see people like you mentioned that may have talent, may even see that what DC is doing is just, or Marvel is doing is just not conducive to what this culture is ever about? Do you think that we're going to see more of these guys maybe say, you know what, I'm done with that, and go more so into doing like independent work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because you've got a lot of, I don't know if, you know, the viewers know this, but you've got a lot of comic creators. And I mean, hot comic creators have huge followings, can't get work or can't get enough work. And they're making ends meet by doing, drawings for people. And commissions. And I mean, that's sad. They want to be doing continuity work. I mean, just this week, you know, Joe Bennett. Joe Bennett gets canceled at Marvel because he did a political cartoon supporting the current president of Brazil, and his writer turned him in. I mean, it's something out of a Gestapo movie.
Yes, exactly.
His writer says, look what he did. He supported a democratically elected candidate for president. And they're like, you're out of here. First of all, I don't know how that's legal. But they fired the guy for the contents of his mind. He's never put anything in any other comic books, anything else. But just as I was blacklisted for my personal politics, he was kicked to the curb for his personal politics. But and a few years ago, he would have just been, he would have had to get a job digging ditches or something, But today, he got fired. By the end of that day, he had a home.
I love
it. He
had
a new home, and I started working with him.
Yep.
And we've already created a whole bunch of stuff, and the week isn't even over.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And that actually segues perfectly into what's going on with Arkhaven and everything it is that you're individually doing, and what insight can you give the audiences in terms of what you're trying to attempt with that? Because you mentioned that it's the same thing. Kind of, I haven't announced who the artists are on my team, but it's the same thing. There's a lot of guys that do great work, formerly of them, sick of this bull crap. And I was like, hey, I'll come over here. I'll pay you better than what they'll pay you, and you'll do some work and not have to feel like you're getting hated. So what is it that you're doing, with the Arkhaven stuff, and just anything that the audience can kind of find out about it?
Well, the big thing at Arkhaven.com is right now is ArkTunes, and it's a brand new digital comic platform. It's free, and it's high res. It's a higher res than most of the digital comics. You can read these comics on the big screen TV in your living room, crystal clear resolution. I love it. And but you can read it on your laptop, your phone. The phone app is coming, but you can read it on your phone, your PC, wherever, your Kindle Fire, wherever you want to read these things. And we've got lots of creators, international creators. We've only been around a few months. We're already well over 2 million views.
Whew.
And there's every genre. We got superheroes. We've also got horror, fantasy, mystery, humor, science fiction, just about anything you want. And if you go check it out, and like I said, it's free. You're going to find something there you want to follow. And there's new episodes of every series every week.
I love that. That's it. Yeah. And that's I know that can be just I can understand where people were terrified to kind of take a big leap like that, to try something like that. But I mean, there's no better time than the present now, because like you said, it's not for lack of having the audience there. There's the audience is still there. They want this material. It's just that their outlet for getting it kind of has betrayed them. You know what I mean? Yeah. They've told them that they don't want to serve them. They hate the customers. They hate where they're at politically. And they don't want their money. So you have all of these people who are willing. They love this. They're lifers. And they want maybe their children to be lifers. And they don't have that outlet. And now to see what you're doing there and what some of these other guys have been doing that we've had on the show is just awesome, and it's far less terrifying than what it was before. So I certainly commend you for doing that, and absolutely having someone work with that gets counseled by them, and you have before the day's over, it shows you the demand for this. Before the day's over, this guy already has work, because he still does good work. That is such an awesome story to hear. So is there anything else aside from that? When you think with Chuck Dixon and his future ventures, aside from what you're doing with Arkhaven, is there anything else on the horizon that we as the audience needs to be keeping a kind of a eye out on?
Working on something really cool now, but I can't talk about it. Okay. And I do have my own YouTube channel just called Chuck Dixon, where I do a weekly thing where I ask, you can ask me questions and I answer them. And I've just recorded my 78th episode today. So, but it's, other than that, it's, mostly work for ArkTunes. And I said I don't want to be the great American novelist, but I do write novels. So you can look on Amazon for my Levon Cade and Bad Times novels.
Yeah, for sure. So, well, I guess I'll end on this. I mean, I'm entering into this space. I'm asking this genuinely because this is a space that I've been in as far as a customer for a very long time. but using the following that I have, and I've been able to accomplish a lot with music and all of that stuff. But this comic book venture that I have is brand new. For me, I'm not knowledgeable on it, but I'm still new at it. I'm not a 40-year vet like someone, certainly like yourself. So is there advice for guys like myself who maybe were customers, still are customers, still fans of this, but are now wanting to go into the creator space? And yeah, there were proper channels that you had to go through back then. Now, not so much. You could kind of do your own thing through some of the things that you mentioned, crowdfunding and all of that. Advice from you to even like literally me and people like me, like things to keep in mind, what we need to look out for in terms of being now a creator in this space and trying to do good work.
Well, it's a different world now than when I started. You got to market yourself. Now you've built this video channel, so you know what that's like. Yeah. That's sweat. Yeah. That's hard. But you got to do the same for the comics. The hardest thing, in a fair world, if we had launched Arktoons in say 2005, we would have 20 million views by now. No. But because of the way social media is and the search engines work and everything else, everything's gamed and everything's algorithms. And if you don't figure it out day by day, because they change it day by day, you cannot get anybody to see your stuff. I always use the example that Graham Nolan, when he launched his Compass comics as a crowdfunder, I didn't hear about it for 3 weeks. Now I'm on Facebook with Graham every day, and I didn't see any of the posts. That's how insidious this is. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You got to get eyes on. I love your show. Appreciate I watch it a lot.
Thank you.
And I love talking to you. But the main reason I'm here is to get out of my own neighborhood. Yeah. And let people who may not know about Arktoons know about it. And that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go and anyone else who's doing comics. It's so hard to get noticed, and they don't make it any easier. Yeah. So back in the day, early 2000s, if you put out a new comic, everybody knew about it. Yeah. But now even your best friend doesn't know about it. Literally, your best friend doesn't know.
Unless you wouldn't rung on his doorbell and told him about it, it's not going to prop up in his feed. But I love that you mentioned that, comparing and contrasting it to not only some of the stuff that I've done and other things that people do with us kind of being more of a digital medium. And it's like it's a new venture. It's going to be much of the same thing, where there's going to have to be, it's a grind within the grind to try to get this and navigate it and get it in. When you can hit it, you can hit it. It's a thriving market. But like you mentioned, they don't make it certainly any easier with the algorithm and all of that stuff. But I thankfully we have had a lot of guys that have been able to, use like the Indiegogos of the world and see a lot of, make a lot. You mentioned Graham Nolan, like these guys have been able to make a killing and revenue off of some of their,
and they earn that killing.
Absolutely.
Crowdfunding is work, brother. Crowdfunding is tough. I can't do it. I have no talent for it. But Graham, Brian Polito, Ethan, guys like that, Richard Meyer, They got the keys to the kingdom. They know what but they're working all the time.
Yeah, it's every day. I think a lot of people lose sight of that with creators that are in our space, because they see definitely the end game. So they see that Ethan made $1 million on Cyberfrog, but they didn't see that, all right, literally every day he's working. Like, he's drawing every day, but then he has to stream. So that's a job in itself.
And then you got your guest room full of boxes. Yeah, because you're doing the fulfillment.
Yeah, because you're doing the fulfillment. Yeah, exactly.
All your kids are licking envelopes. It's nuts. And it's like, I just want to sit here and make stuff up. I don't want to be doing all that. But these guys got interested in that end of it. Graham likes that end of it.
Yeah.
He likes the promotion and the marketing and figuring out the fulfillment and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
it's intriguing. It is certainly intriguing, but I love it. I love to see that. And certainly more importantly is people that have done great work over the last decades that have seen that, because the ideological line in the sand got drawn, unfortunately. And these people said they don't. And it's not just with the people they deem as conservatives. Like I said, I'm on the libertarian side. They hate me too. You know what I mean? And it doesn't matter. Like, it's just,
they hate everybody eventually.
They hate basically everybody. there, but the customers, the fans have been able to catch these guys, and I love to see, like, whether it be guys like yourself, whether we talk about Ethan Shane and Graham Nolan, these people that have formerly been in the big leagues, rather, got ostracized, and the customers went and caught them. It's the perfect story ending, and to see these guys continuing to grind, because like you say, we're lifers. So it's not easy to just say, all right, well, I guess I'm done with comic books because DC and Marvel blacklisted me. No, it's like, this is what I know. I bleed this. So I got to figure out how to adjust. And you guys have been able to do that. And again, I just appreciate that, because I love to see creators certainly in that space that I grew up on myself, because I'm on the younger side of things. But just to see myself, see people that I grew up on. Like I said, when I think 90s, I can't not think Chuck. All those books were stuff that I was literally reading growing up.
It couldn't escape me in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. No, it was no getting away from Chuck Dixon in the 90s, which was great because you were in that high of a demand, and still people are wondering what you're doing and everything. So I'm glad we can have you on the show. We'll be having all of those links certainly in the description. Getting your channel, we want to make sure we get thousands of people to go subscribe, certainly to the YouTube, because a lot of people don't know that it's there, and they need to understand that the great Chuck, he's accessible too. You can ask him questions. The great Chuck Dixon is on YouTube, and you can actually ask this man questions, man. Again, Chuck, I appreciate you coming on, and certainly when you got anything that you're working on that you're stoked about, don't hesitate to hit us up. We'll make sure we get you back on the show. And again, man, I hope to have you on very soon again.
And I'm sure some more outrageous things will happen you'll want my opinion on. So
yes, exactly.
I'll be back.
And it'll probably be your characters that they'll do it to, unfortunately. So we'll absolutely have you back again, man.
Chances are you're right.
Exactly. I appreciate you coming on, man.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having me.